last year. Um, Now they've played 2 games, so there's a little bit of tape, so you have a little bit better understanding of their roster. When you watch the tape from last year, I mean, you can see why the Philadelphia Eagles are good because half their team plays for them. But it's an extremely talented team. I mean, they've got a ton of 4 and 5 star players, and they've recruited really well. And they play with an intensity that I think they get from their head coach. It seems like a very intense guy as well. They've got every scheme. I mean, it's like being back in the NFL when you talk about scheme. They've got them all.
All right, welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. We are breaking down the South Carolina matchup in Athens this weekend versus the number 1 2-time national champion Georgia Bulldogs. And yeah, I think Logan's kind of summed things up pretty well there at the top. South Carolina's going to be overmatched in this one from a talent perspective. There's no really 2 ways to slice that. But we'll get into it because obviously you could just turn it off and not watch it, but they play the games for a reason. We'll get into what could go right, what could make this game a little weird, and we'll get into that here shortly. As always, we start talking about recruiting. I'll have my full weekly recruiting wrap-up this weekend, probably Saturday morning. We'll see, whatever. But one quick note is that the 2026 Rivals 100 just dropped this week, and South Carolina's lone 2026 commitment, quarterback Landon Duckworth, landed in the top 100. He's at 63, I believe. And when I looked through and tried to count very quickly, he is the number 3 rated dual threat quarterback and the number 6 overall quarterback for the 2026 class in those initial rankings. So about what we expected. Always a 4-star as well. About what we expected. It seems like South Carolina is off to a good start again with the 2026 class, and it's a good Duckworth will be a good one to build around going forward. We'll see if he turns into like the peer recruiter that Dante Reno has been for the 2024 class, or if that's someone else. Because I would say in the 2023 class, that guy was probably Zabari Sandy, who was a safety, so and helped pull a lot of those guys from the DMV region. We'll talk more recruiting a little bit later. Obviously, next week there's another home matchup. There'll be a new visitors list, all those sorts of things. But let's talk about this matchup with Georgia. So as Logan's just described, he said that the Eagles were pretty good this year because they just drafted a bunch of Georgia guys. They've been recruiting 4 and 5 stars, so they're reloading more than anything for those guys that they missed. Now, granted, maybe you don't have a replacement for like a Jalen Carter, who wreck shop week 1 last week for
sure
the
did.
Eagles. So we'll see if there's some matchups that we can kind of exploit. But yeah, give me your overarching thoughts on this game, and I guess what hope do Gamecock fans have as they turn on their TVs at 3:30 on Saturday?
All right, well, just start with the obvious. Georgia is better. Georgia is favored by 4 touchdowns for a reason. There's no reason to act like that's not the case. As far as if you're South Carolina, what you're looking for in this game, what maybe gives you more hope than you had last year in that game. One, your quarterback's playing a lot better than last year. Spencer Rattler clearly is on a different level than he was 365 days ago. So that, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you just snap. Okay. So that's one to start with. Georgia doesn't have the same quarterback experience. Carson Beck is a 5-star. Carson Beck is obviously very talented. He's not Stetson Bennett in terms of knowing the offense. Carson Beck has never started an SEC game before. Saturday will be his first. And I think if you're trying to exploit something there, you have an opportunistic secondary. You think it back to, Georgia, South Carolina games in the past that have gotten a little bit weird. It's usually turnovers. I think about that 2019 game, especially. I think there were 4. And if you can just put a little bit of pressure on him, you can force a mistake early. If you can maybe I don't even want to take it out in front, but stay even for a quarter, 2 quarters, and you just plant a seed of doubt. That's, again, you're talking about, for South Carolina to win this football game, you're talking about 100 dominoes that have to fall the right way. But if talking about the first or second one that might just get the ball rolling, I think you probably need to force an early turnover on an inexperienced quarterback and see if you can, no pun intended, get him a little bit rattled.
Yeah, I think that, you definitely have to try to take advantage of that. We've seen lesser quarterbacks than Stetson Bennett succeed against South Carolina over the course of this series, just because they run the ball so well, they protect. But I do think the South Carolina defense is probably better than the one that I can't even remember the kid's name that like broke the completion record in Athens back in like 20.
Was it Hudson Mason?
Yeah, someone that. Yeah, there's a reason that we can't think of his name.
Have you ever heard the Georgia quarterback bit, the Spencer Hall? They just say all the same sounding names, like Hudson Mason, Aaron Murray, Grayson Lambert. They all just kind of sound the same.
They do. It's a white kid with rich parents. So, yeah, I mean, man, now we've said so many names. I lost Carson Beck.
There you go. See, they all sound the same.
Have a career day as well. Probably. I'm not gonna rule it out. But I do think there's something to be said for him facing an SEC defense as a starter for the first time, while a game is still in question. Obviously, he got some late work here and there last year. And yeah, maybe you can take advantage of that and sort of get in his head a little bit. I do think that at least in the secondary, you have the players to create some tough throws for him. Can you put some pressure on him? I don't know. Can you get some explosive plays on offense early on to kind of put some pressure on Georgia needing to score? Maybe. I think it's going to be tough to string together a lot of like 10, 15 play drives. I think you need to get some quick hitters.
Explosives. Yeah.
And then maybe in special teams, right? Special teams is the one area of this game last year that you could even argue South Carolina won. And so can you make a game-breaking play on special teams once again?
It's happened in that stadium before. I'm thinking about Melvin Ingram now, taking that punt past Harry Dog. But yeah, I think going back to the Beck point too, this is something I wanted to ask you. You heat them up, right? That's the way to do this. You try to blitz. You try to get some pressure on them. You trust that DQ Smith, that even as a freshman, Jalen Kilgore, that Marcellus Dial, that you just kind of trust that those guys are going to be able to hold their water in coverage for a little bit, even if it's man-to-man, and you try to heat Beck up a little bit for some quicker decisions, right? That's the move here.
Yeah, and now, of course, the problem, and we saw this a little bit last year, is once Georgia gets the running game going, those guys start to creep up to try to make a play because they're frustrated that they're gashing you on the edge in the run game, and that's when the PA pass, hits you over the top or whatever. Now, on the running front, yesterday I posted a View from the Other Side article from UGAsports.com, Anthony Dasher, where I asked him 5 questions, and one of them was about the injury situation for the Bulldogs. And Kendall Milton and is that how you say it, Dewan Edwards?
I think so.
Both are dealing with injuries right now, hamstring and knee injuries. It's possible that Edwards is back for this week, but will he be 100%? I don't know. And also he mentioned that the offensive line has been sort of struggling to gel here early. So maybe there's
got new tackles there.
Yeah. There's a little bit of hope in that Georgia's running game isn't going to be the, DeAndre Swift, Nick Chubb level, at least at this point in the season. And you can, try to create a little bit of a mismatch there, or try to at least come out somewhat even there.
I definitely think the strength of this Georgia line is the interior. I mean, I think Shane Beamer mentioned they've got probably an NFL center, and Cedric Van Pran has been there 4 years. They're replacing the 2 tackles. If you can get some pressure off the edge, if you can do that, I mean, we're just hitting all the main points we talked about with South Carolina 2 weeks ago. But if you can force some obvious passing downs, you can pin your ears back a little bit and trust your secondary. I mean, Georgia's got I mean, they got outstanding players everywhere. They've got 2 transfer wide receivers, look like game breakers. Dominic Lovett torched South Carolina last year in that Missouri game. He's at Georgia now. I just think the way to do this is you're going to have to win the turnover battle. I'm not sure how you do that without forcing Carson Beck into some mistakes, and I think you're going to have to get some pressure on him. And whether or not you can do that is a different question, but I don't think this is a drop 7, rush 4 kind of game where that's going to work.
I don't know that you have the personnel to make that happen. So yeah, you're definitely going to have to dial up some pressure. And yeah, I think you just have to have some good things happen early, be it turnovers or explosive plays on offense. What are we hearing from an injury front on South Carolina at this point? So can we expect Antwan Wells to be 100% finally for the first time this season? That would go a long way in helping out Spencer Rattler if you have both he and Leggett, who's obviously off to a great start this season. Also, I saw Eddie Lewis was the highest rated PFF wide receiver. Was it in the country or SEC
I think
this
I saw
past
the country.
weekend? So
he had 6 catches.
Nice.
He had the deep ball. Yeah, that's a weapon for sure. Wells, 100% no. That's just still going to be a process. More than you saw last week, yes, is kind of what I'm thinking, kind of what I'm hearing. That's going to take time still, but he's practiced more this week than he did last week, or been able to do more, I should say. I think kind of the same with Nicky Manwari. Whether or not he plays, travels, I'm still not 100% sure. Marcellus Dial seemed pretty confident he'd be back. Obviously, Shane's keeping that close to the vest, but it's just hamstring injuries specifically are so tough. They can linger. Everyone's timeline's different, but I think he's trending in the right direction. The Wells question is interesting to me because, like, even if he's not 100%, if you have 60% of Juice Wells, and I'm just throwing a number out there, that's still a pretty dangerous decoy you can put on the field.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worked at times over the first 2 weeks even.
Right.
Probably a big reason why Leggett's had some of those one-on-one opportunities. And yeah, you're going to want him out there at least if they can't double up Leggett, who is good, but if he's going up against 2 guys in the Georgia secondary at a time, that's going to be a tough situation. You try to get the tight ends involved a little bit, but we are expecting them to probably
they're going to have to block.
Yeah, max protect some because of some of the deficiencies along the offensive line. What about Marky Anderson? Heard anything about his injury situation this week, or kind of same old?
I haven't heard anything there. I also wouldn't, even if you have a healthy Marky Anderson, I don't think you throw him into this game just because he hasn't played yet. You're not going to start him with Georgia the same way you didn't start Tree Babalade and Trovon Ball with the North Carolina game. They didn't play at all in that game. And you worked the minute Furman. I just don't think that's a realistic option this week, starting a true freshman against Georgia. Not starting the game, like just playing him at all, starting his career that way. Kason Henry, I still don't expect to play. He was on crutches on the sideline last week. I think you're still going to be down there at right tackle. I'm trying to think who else. Your nickel position.
Gear.
Gear, I think he's probably on the likelier side. Still hasn't played yet, but I lean towards, again, that's going to be a rotation thing. That's going to be working him in for snaps. I'm not saying GTA Gear is going to play 50 snaps, but I think likelier than it was last week that he'll play. What else do we have? That nickel position, Spalding and Nelson, both questionable. That's where I think you get really dicey.
Well, there is some flexibility there.
Snaps.
There's some flexibility there if Eamon Warwick does make it back this week.
Yeah, they've worked DQ at nickel before.
Yeah.
So I think that's what would end up happening is you'd have DQ playing nickel. He's kind of good in the box anyway. And then you would have Eamon Warwick and Kilgore at safety if that's what ended up happening.
Which actually, long-term, could be your best 3.
Yeah.
Especially with the way that the injuries have played out at nickel. But we'll have to see if Eamon Warwick's back. Like you said, hamstring injuries can linger for several weeks.
And if he's back, is he 100%? Which I don't think he would be, even if he is playing. But
we'll have more info on the injuries tonight after Shane Beamer's appearance on Carolina Calls. He usually does a little short injury report right at the beginning. How much we get out of those usually right before the game is something else because we've seen that this doesn't like to tip their hand if they can help it on those sorts of things. Which, hey, I don't blame them. Gamesmanship, right? As far as I guess sort of questions heading into this game, I think you can't bear the lead. You have to start with the offensive line. Terrible against North Carolina. 9 sacks, 15 tackles for a loss. We've talked about all these things, or 17, whatever it was. Better last week, but obviously a different level of competition last week. You did work in Tree Babalade. You did work in Trovon Ball, though I heard Shane Beamer call him Tro in the pressers this week. So Tro Ball, Tro and Tree. The two freshmen played pretty well, and we talked on Sunday about potentially that set of Tree at left tackle, Gargiulo at left guard, Vershawn Lee at center, Trovon Ball at right guard, and
there's Ja'Kai Moore at right tackle on that drive.
Yeah, Moore at right tackle. That might be your best 5, but are you throwing 2 freshmen in there in Athens in that environment this early in their career?
I lean towards yes, because I still think that gives you the best chance to protect Spencer Rattler, both from a I can throw the ball standpoint to an I can stay healthy standpoint. You're going to have to live with mistakes. You're going to have to live with, there's probably going to be a false start or delay a game or two in front of 90,000 people when you're trying to get the protection set. That's going to happen. But if you're talking about this Saturday, I think we already have the known quantities on maybe not even so much Fugar because he's only played 1 game at this level, but you still kind of know what you have there. He's played a lot of college football. Tyshawn Wanamaker's been here for a couple of years. You know what you have there. Jackson Hughes, you saw what you had there week 1 at left tackle. I think that it's kind of grass has to be greener kind of thing. And I don't mean that as a shot at those guys, but even if it looks as bad as it did against North Carolina with Babalade and Baugh in there, you take that as, okay, they're going to learn from this. They're going to be in the program another 3 or 4 years. This is going to be a good thing long term if they're learning from this. And I think if you're just if it's going to look that way, probably no matter what you put out there, I think any offensive line in America would struggle to block those guys. I think you probably want to go younger.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a game like this, just like in, say, the Tennessee game last year or whatever, you do have to have a little bit of a effort mentality, for lack of a better term. If those are your most talented guys, I think you probably take your licks with them. Unless, I don't know, you're in practice and you're seeing them make tons and tons of mental freshman mistakes, and you can't throw them out there. I think most likely, I don't know if we'll see those guys start the game. I think most likely you're seeing those guys work into the rotation. But I think you're still going to see plenty of Fugar and Hughes as well. I do also think that there's something to be said for shaking a true freshman's confidence. There's a difference between getting him in there last week against Furman and getting them some early wins and throwing them to the Wolves in a road game in Athens. So yeah, I think there might still be a little bit of a ease them in mentality, but I wouldn't be totally shocked if they go the other direction either. I mean, I think it's pretty clear from a talent perspective that starting 5 that I just mentioned is your best 5. So maybe there is a level of just kind of taking your lumps with them and going forward.
Yeah, and I really think when you talk about your best 5, we're really talking about those 2 freshman spots, because there's no way, barring injury, obviously, that Vershawn Lee's not going to play center. You're not going to mess with your quarterback center exchange. And there's no way Gargiulo's not going to be in there. You didn't bring him here. You didn't bring a 4-year offensive lineman in to sit. And there's probably no way Ja'Kai Moore's not in there. He's one of your more experienced guys too. So really, we're not talking about a best 5 so much as we are, you've got 3 spots you feel okay about. Not even okay, but that's just what it's going to be. What are the other 2? What can you maximize out of those 2? And I do think it's Babalade and Baugh personally, just because I know the staff, you can't think this way as a staff. You're not thinking ahead. You're thinking about how to win the football game on Saturday. Does it do your vision your program any good if you get out of this game and Babalade and Ba have 0 reps in a big game environment and you haven't given them any? Does it help you long term if those guys don't play at all Saturday? I think it hurts you probably.
Or does it even help you this season? Because I think this is where we're headed no matter what.
Yeah.
Just how long is it going to take to get there? And you have a very winnable / crucial game next week against
Yes.
Mississippi State. So I think it would do you some good to go ahead and get those guys some reps. Maybe it's a situation where you start with the veteran guys, and then if you do fall down a few scores, you end up down 17, 21 points in the second half. You just let the freshmen finish things out because why not at that point? Or yeah, maybe you think that they give you the best chance to stay competitive with it early. And the thing is, I don't think that you need them to be perfect in this game.
No.
Spencer Rattler is going to be sacked in this game. Let's go ahead and
Breaking news.
Accept that.
Yeah.
You need them to be average, right? Like, can we bring that 9 sacks that they gave up against North Carolina down to 4 or 5? Can you give Rattler a few plays per series where he gets some time to find his open receiver? Which we've already kind of mentioned this. I think you do. If there is one place where you have a little bit of a potential advantage, it's your wide receivers versus Georgia's secondary, which is still very good, but did graduate several to the NFL.
Javon Bullard's questionable too. It's an All-American safety.
So I think that's where your mismatch is, if there is one. But obviously, you have to protect Rattler long enough to get the ball out.
Yeah, I think that's where the tight ends come back into play. I think you're going to have to see a lot of that 12 personnel again. I don't even want to call it an advantage, but if you're talking about, I do agree with what you said earlier that you're probably not stringing 10, 12, 15 play drives together against this defense. You're going to have to hit on some chunk plays. And to be fair, I'm thinking of the one early in the game last year. It was before an interception, but Rattler did hit on one big play. I think it was to Wells on that first drive, got him down to the 30. You can hit a couple explosives against this defense. Just, I'm trying to think of this like a boxer almost. Just land a few jabs, stay in the fight long enough. That's kind of where I think you have to look at this. And to your point on the offensive line, and you say, and I do think you're right, you don't want to play these guys. You don't want to screw their confidence. Okay, they got wrecked. Where do we go from here? The flip side of that is not that they're going to bully Georgia's defensive line off the field at all. Hey, if those guys play well, if those guys play average, if those guys spring a couple big plays, well, yeah, you're not scared of any other defensive line you face. You can block well against that one. What if Tosin Babalade can block well on Saturday or average or give you a chance?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we hopped on, but I think at the very least, he's your most athletic option at left tackle on the roster that's healthy right now. So I think he's still got some more strength and conditioning to do to be able to go toe-to-toe with some of those Georgia defensive linemen, but is he at least quick enough to get in front of them longer than Fugar or Hughes? I think so. So, I don't know. Does that buy Rattler a couple more seconds that he wouldn't have with one of those other guys in there? I tend to think so. It's just, keeping after what is going to be a very tough matchup. Now, to their credit, in the press conferences this week, I believe it was Beamer was talking about Tree Babalade and his attitude, and kind of said that he's kind of built for that, right? Where he's got kind of a positive attitude, whether you're up or down or whatever's happening. So maybe he has the personality for it, and you trust him to just use this as a learning experience and, work as hard as he can in this scenario.
That's kind of what I think too. And then just sticking with the offensive line more, this is from Brent Rollins, who works for UGA Rivals website. Right now, South Carolina is second in the SEC in passing play percentage, only behind Texas A&M. Georgia's third, by the way, but 65.8% of the time South Carolina is throwing the ball. They couldn't even really run the ball that well against Furman. It looked a little bit better. You made a couple more creases, but I don't think I'm breaking any news here that they probably won't be able to run the ball very well Saturday. do you just abandon that from the start? Do you say this is going to have to be a Rattler masterclass to have a chance here? Or do you try it a little bit?
I probably come out slinging it, honestly.
That's kind of what I'm thinking too.
Even if by slinging it, I mean like you're working in side to side passes. We'll see if Amarian Brown's back, who has been pretty good in the first 2 games of the season of getting out there in space and making something happen on those shorter downs. Dakarian Joyner had 6 catches last week. I think you still use him in the passing game as that utility knife that he's been or whatever. But yeah, I don't see much use in sitting there and trying to run a bunch of power off tackle sort of.
No, that's how 1st and 10 becomes 2nd and 12. Like I just think that's what it's going to be.
And we're already talking about the pressure that Rattler's going to feel. Help them out by not giving them too many obvious passing downs to start things off like that.
Yeah, I think I don't want to come in with the attitude that you can't run the ball, that you are incapable of getting yards on the ground, but I think you're closer to that in this game than you will be in any other game this season, probably, just given what Georgia does against the run. This is going to be number 7's game. I'm not going to say win or lose because he can play well and they can still lose against this team, but his game to keep competitive. And by the way, and I wrote about this a little bit in my final preview that's going to be up tomorrow, big game for Spencer Rattler. Big game for his NFL draft stock playing against this defense. He was pretty bad last year against Georgia. That was one of his worst games of the year. He threw 2 picks. I think he only completed 13 passes in that game. If you buy into the idea, and I think we all do, that Rattler's better, that Rattler's an NFL quarterback, this is kind of a prove-it game for him too, isn't it?
I think so. Now, I still think that he'll be graded on a curve if he's got dudes in his face all game and stuff. But, he had dudes in his face all game against UNC and still completed 30 of 39 passes. So I think just not putting the ball in too much danger, making the open throws when they're there and when you have the time. And yeah, I guess trust Xavier Legette on a few of these, because I think you're going to have to hope that he can out-athlete some of that secondary if you're going to get some of those explosive plays that we're talking about.
I think that's the only way you're gonna do this. It's gonna have to be a big play kind of game, whether that's explosive plays, special teams, like you mentioned. There is a little bit of Georgia turnover vulnerability. They've turned the ball over 4 times the first 2 games. Carson Beck did throw a pick last week against Ball State. Like you're gonna have to steal some possessions somewhere and capitalize on those. I think that's going back to the UNC game. You did get 2 turnovers. You did recover an onside kick. You didn't do anything with it. That's what this looks like. I don't think that's going to happen. But if you're talking about a path here where 100 things go right and you win the football game, that's what it's going to be. You're not going to beat Georgia down to down to down. I just don't think you're going to do that.
Yeah, we've seen a recent enough example in a 2019 South Carolina team that I don't think is as good as this team from top to bottom.
Team went 4-8.
Yeah, exactly. But go in there and make something big happen. You had to have freshman Dakarian Joyner, who I believe talked a little bit about that game.
Yes, he did.
This week. Finish that game out because Bentley got hurt, or was it Bentley back then? Anyway,
was it Holinsky?
It might have been. It was it was not what you wanted, but you got a big play early in that one.
It was Holinsky. I'm looking at it now.
I think you got a deep pass to Brian Edwards that kind of sprung the door open. You scored first, or you at least made something happen first, and then you just muddied up the game and got it ugly and forced some turnovers. I think that's kind of the path to victory here. We can get into score predictions here in just a minute, but I think if you're going to win this, it's going to be something like 21-17.
I was saying low 20s.
Like like a really ugly game. I don't see a scenario where you're going to put up 30 plus against this Georgia defense.
I'm looking at the 2019 game now. You got a 46-yard touchdown pass to Brian Edwards in the first quarter. That made it 7-3 after Georgia kicked the field goal early.
Yes.
Jake Fromm threw 3 picks, including a pick 6 right before halftime. That's what gave you the lead that you held pretty much the whole way until Georgia tied it with 2 minutes to go, and then you win the game in overtime after another interception.
And
Um,
a missed field goal too,
yep.
somewhere along the line.
Rodrigo
Yeah.
Blankenship missed for 42 yards out. Um, that's what it's going to have to be. And I don't think that's going to happen. But I will say before we get into score predictions that are probably going to be ugly, what would have, if this game goes the way we think it's going to go, what would you have to see to still think, all right, this is better than it was last year? This is on the right track. They can beat Mississippi State. What are your positive signs, even if they lose this game by 30 points?
Yeah, I think the O-line looking average is probably the top of the list there. Like I said, give up 5 sacks, don't give up 9. Let Rattler make a couple of big plays. I think that's another big aspect is him not crumbling on the road in
Yeah.
Athens. And I think defensively, you gave up probably a lot of yards, but not a lot of points. You kind of the bend and don't break mentality worked against a team again that's better than you, but you made plays when you needed to, and I don't know, you don't get fully blown out. Maybe you lose by 2 scores or less.
Yeah, I think my main thing would be just, even if you do get fully blown out, can you stop the trickle a little bit? Can you, and this was a 21-0 game after 3 possessions last year. This was a 14-3 game at the end of the first quarter 2 years ago, and it was a 20-point game before halftime. Can you just get to the end of the first quarter down 7 or tied? Ball State did that last week in Athens. I don't think that's a crazy, unrealistic expectation for a team that started slow this year in a couple games in Georgia. Can you get to halftime and the game's not completely over? Maybe you're down 14 at halftime. That's not I don't believe in moral victories. You shouldn't in this conference. You should want more for your program. All that stuff we talked about last week on the Sunday show. That to me is you look like you belong on the field with them for at least a half, because that hasn't happened yet in the Shane Beamer era in either of those games.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is like us talking with a realistic perspective or whatever, I guess. I don't think there's anyone in that locker room that doesn't believe that they have a chance. Like I think that they're going to go in there and try to win the football game.
Yeah.
And we've seen throughout the Beamer era thus far that belief can take you a long way. So I think we're just saying if this game gets played 100 times, at least 95 of them go Georgia's way.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are those 5 times, and maybe this could be one of them where things get a little weird and wonky and interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. I think just like keeping it close in the first half, making it interesting. You go into halftime, you still feel like that there's a chance, and then you let the chips fall where they do after that.
Yep, and we've talked about this rivalry before. We've talked about Melvin Ingram or Dakereon Joyner or Quincy Carter throwing 5 picks, whatever you want to do. Stuff happens if you stay close, but it can't happen if you're down 21 at the end of the first quarter.
Yeah, and I do think that there's something to be said for the way Spencer Rattler's played over the last 5 games of his South Carolina career. If that trajectory continues, I do think you always have a puncher shot. He's made some incredible plays over the last calendar year. I think you have the athletes to make some things happen if he has enough time to get a couple of those incredible throws off. And if that happens pretty early, then things will get interesting. And I hope that does happen. It'll make our Sunday show a lot more fun.
I'm
all
not
right,
picking that, but
yeah, let's get into that. So what's your actual prediction in this one?
I'm trying to think what I wrote now, what I have in there. I think I said like 45-14 or Georgia 13, something like that. I think Georgia wins big. I think Georgia covers. Maybe you do get that close for first quarter, but too much depth, too much talent, too much inexperience for South Carolina. I think you're looking at 1-2 and a season-defining game next week against Mississippi State.
Yeah, I also picked Georgia to win. I was pretty close to that. I picked them 45-21.
Yeah.
Probably.
So you got South Carolina covering. That number's at 27.5.
I do think that that's a really big spread for this rivalry and for the way that the team has played under Shane Beamer's leadership through most of this era. Now, granted, they did get blown out by Georgia last year at home, Was that indicative of who South Carolina was last year and who Georgia was last year? I don't know. I think probably they were a little bit closer than the final score there indicated last year. Less than 27 points. How about that? But that's still a pretty big range. So, yeah, we'll see. I think that they're going to cover, but I do think ultimately that I called it the boa constrictor effect of Georgia's defense is going to eventually set in.
Yeah, no argument here. And really, if you get out of this game healthy, I think that's the main thing. You're already stacked up pretty thin on the injuries, at least guys that are questionable, guys that are banged up. If you get out of this week with nothing worse, I think you can kind of take a breath, reset, get ready for a big home game.
Yeah, and for the record, count me in as someone that hopes in the post game on Saturday that Shane Beamer gets to point to the room and say none of you picked us, which is exactly what he did against Tennessee last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe we'll all be pleasantly surprised. But yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, let's look around the country a little bit. This is a terrible slate of games.
It's thin.
Yeah, so there's a reason that game day is at Colorado State, which is probably going to be a blowout in favor of Colorado. But
Buffs favored by 23 there.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's enough. Let's look at some of the stat picks we did this week. If you'd like to see them all, they're on GamecockScoop.com this morning with a little bit of breakdown of why you should watch each. First one we had was LSU -9 at Mississippi State. Some of these lines have probably moved, but we locked them in on Sunday. Who'd you have in that one?
I'm pulling up the sheet now. I picked LSU to cover on the road, but I don't feel good about it. Mississippi State did not play well last week. They were pretty lucky to escape that game against Arizona. They got the benefit of 4 turnovers last week and still needed overtime to beat what I think is a pretty mediocre Pac-12 team in Arizona. I'm picking the LSU bounce back after how they looked week 1, but also I would not be surprised if a weird 11 a.m. kick in Starkville goes south. The Mississippi State wins.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And actually, across the board, all 5 of us picked LSU and picked LSU to cover, which honestly gives me a little bit less confidence.
Yeah.
For the record, by the way, Allen is 18-7, just picking the game straight up this year. I'm 17-8, picking the game straight up this year.
Game, yeah.
You're the only one. Well, you're making the most money if we were putting anything on it because you're 14-11 against the spread. So we'll take that for what it's worth. I'm 11-14. I'm not doing terrible, but can't keep that up or it's gonna.
Did the parlay hit last week?
It did not. I can't remember. There was like one thing that was screwed up on it, and it wasn't even far off. But I haven't put mine in yet this week, so I don't have one for you this week. All right, Penn State -16 at Illinois. This is maybe the best Penn State team of the James Franklin era, although that one with Saquon and all them was pretty good too. But what do you think in this one?
Taking Penn State, I think they're really good. I watched Illinois Kansas last week. That Illinois lost by double digits, and they were lucky to stay that close. I'm taking Penn State.
Yeah, I feel like Illinois is good at making games weird. So I picked Penn State, but I picked Illinois to cover. But it's not one I feel great about. But that was just like a weird. That was a big spread, 16 points.
Speaking of weird numbers, I think this next one's very weird.
Yeah. So next we have K-State -5 at Mizzou. K-State destroyed Missouri last year at Missouri. Mizzou hasn't looked particularly good so far this year. K-State has their number 16 right now in the country.
I mean, they blew out a very good Sun Belt team last week in Troy. I mean, they crumpled them up.
Yeah, so that feels like it's too low of a line. I agree. That's definitely on my list as far as betting interests go this week. But also, we talked last week about some of these that feel like a little suckery.
That's the only reason I don't get it. I don't know why that's only 5. I mean, Middle Tennessee State not only stayed close last week, they had the ball in Missouri territory with a chance to go down and win the game with 3 minutes to go. Like, that wasn't just like a weird game. Like, Missouri was actively in danger of losing that game for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I think Kansas State should blow them out.
Yeah.
But the number's weird. It scares me.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. We've already talked several times this year about how Vegas seems to just know some weird things. So, Oregon State minus 25.5 at home versus San Diego State. See, we're already getting into these kind of ugly games because there's not a whole lot to choose from. I think I'm the only one that picked Oregon State to cover that 25.5. I think they're pretty good on offense. I mean, San Diego State's not bad, obviously, but
It's just a big number. I like Oregon State a lot. I think they're very good. I'm all in on this Pac-12 swan song thing. 25 and a half's a lot.
Gamecock fans, do you know who the running back for Oregon State is that's averaging over 6 a carry right now?
I actually don't.
Yeah, Deshaun Fenwick. He started his career at South Carolina before transferring out there. You probably wouldn't mind having him.
No,
right
you would not.
You also got Georgia, obviously, minus 27 against South Carolina. We've already talked a little bit about that. I picked South Carolina to cover the 27. You picked Georgia to cover the 27. We'll see how that goes. North Carolina minus 6.5 against Minnesota at home. How are you feeling about that one?
I think that line's an overreaction to UNC wobbling against App State last week in a hangover spot. I've watched both teams. Drake May is very good. Minnesota's quarterback play is very much not. I think this is just that line's already moved to 7.5 this week, so people are betting on UNC.
I think if
matchups too much.
I think if your crowning defensive achievement for Minnesota is holding Nebraska to 10
That's
points,
kind of
whatever
what I'm
it was,
too.
That doesn't say a whole lot about your defense. No offense to Marcus Satterfield, our good friend. Washington minus 14.5 at Michigan State. Obviously, Michigan State has had a bit of a weird week. I picked Washington to cover that because of the weird week, but you always play. I wouldn't want to bet that one because you always play the risk of like the team rallying behind the interim or whatever.
I would have picked Washington to cover before just because I think Michael Penix is going to be a Heisman finalist, and I'm all in on that offense. Definitely doing it now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the safer bet. I wouldn't want to put any actual money on it because it gets weird sometimes with those situations. Look at when Spurrier left and Sean Elliott took over for South Carolina. He had them in very competitive in games that they had no business being competitive in just because of the belief factor or whatever. All right, probably the game of the day if you're an SEC fan. Although I don't know that it's going to live up to the billing. Tennessee minus 7.5 at Florida in the Swamp.
Okay, first of all, for the sake of the conversation, I did pick Tennessee to win and cover. I'm very curious about this game. I think Tennessee's clearly better. You know what I think of Florida. You know I don't think Florida's good. They need this one. Like I saw someone else making the point, and I can't remember who, but Billy Napier was 0-4 against Florida's rivals last year. And if you look at what Georgia is, what Florida State is, the fact they have to go to LSU this year, this is the winnable one. If you want to avoid an 0-8 there, which I think 0-8 against your rivals probably gets you fired at Florida, right?
Yeah.
Florida needs this game. It's at home. It's at night. It's a desperation spot. I think they're going to blitz the hell out of Joe Milton, try to confuse him in his first big road environment. I picked Tennessee to cover because I think they're better. I would not at all be surprised if a very desperate, backs against the wall Florida team that is okay on defense, I think the offense is the bigger problem there, finds a way to make this ugly and wins like 20-17.
That's kind of where I'm at. Tennessee has not looked infallible.
What did you pick?
I picked Tennessee to cover. But I don't think that they've looked infallible, and it wouldn't totally shock me if this one got weird and ugly.
Does this, to be clear, I don't think Graham Mertz can put up 63 points, and I think Tennessee defense is a little bit better, but does this not feel like Tennessee going to South Carolina last year with everyone telling South Carolina they're not good, backs against the wall, nothing's going right, everybody just feeling down on themselves, and you come up, I don't know, it's
yeah,
Joe
I mean, I definitely think
not,
the script will have to follow a different format because
it's not going to be that. But
you don't have the offensive explosiveness capabilities that South Carolina had last year, and underwhelmed on up until that point. But I think that there's a scenario where Joe Milton throws 3 picks or something, and this gets really weird.
Joe Milton on the road at night in the swamp against a team that needs a win.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Another one that I think is could be a sneaky good game is BYU and Arkansas. BYU at Arkansas. Arkansas is favored by 10.5, and to me that felt like too many points. So I am picking Arkansas to win, but I picked BYU to cover that spread.
Well, the 10.5 is weird to me because Rocket Sanders isn't playing this week. He's still injured. I almost picked BYU to win outright just because of that. Just because I think that's just so much of Arkansas's identity, what they want to do on offense, running the ball. A lot of what they can do with the zone read stuff with KJ Jefferson depends on being able to run the ball with Rocket. I would not be surprised if BYU won. I think Arkansas finds a way at home, but I mean, Rocket Sanders is one of the most dynamic players in the country, not just in the SEC, and not having him against a quality opponent, I definitely question the 10.5.
Yeah, I don't really care about talking about Texas and Wyoming.
Why is that even on the sheet?
I say that's also on our sheet, but whatever. Tomorrow night you got Virginia and Maryland. Maryland is favored by 14.5. That feels pretty safe to me.
Take September, Maryland.
I would pick them to cover for sure. Like you said, Colorado minus 23 against Colorado State. That's going to be the late game. Doesn't start till 10 Eastern on ESPN. I probably won't watch that. Any other games from this weekend that we didn't mention that you're kind of keeping your eye on?
I don't have so much that I want to talk about. I think we need to break down on here, but there's just some very weird. Oh, Backyard Brawl. Forgot about that one. That's fun. I love that game. That game's just what I love about college football, the rivalries and what that means to people there.
Do you have the line on that one?
West Virginia. We should have put that on the sheet instead of Texas, Wyoming. Jeez.
Yeah. West Virginia minus 2.5. Gotcha. Yeah.
That's a night game. Looking forward to that.
I would probably pick Pitt to cover that.
I mean, I know Pitt came out completely flat last week against Cincinnati, which is probably why that line's where it is. I still don't think West Virginia is good. That game last year was great. It was tied late. Pitt got a pick six, 2 minutes left to win. That is a true throw the spread out, just play 60 minutes rivalry.
Yeah.
Probably pick Pitt, but that's fun to watch at least.
Yeah, that one should be entertaining. TCU Houston could be kind of interesting. I think TCU should cover the 7.5.
There's some, and I don't need to talk about them, but there's some weird Power 5 going on the road to Group of 5 stuff this week. That's just weird seeing on the schedule. You've got Wake Forest going on the road to Old Dominion, Oklahoma going on the road to Tulsa, Iowa State going on the road to Ohio, Alabama at South Florida in the Pirate Ship Stadium, and there was one more.
Bama's going to Tampa. I didn't realize that.
There was one more. Vanderbilt going to UNLV, heading out to Vegas. I don't need to talk about any.
That one's actually kind of fun to me. And
I don't need to talk about. You can talk about Vanderbilt if you want, but
no, that was one I was thinking about throwing a bet.
Vanderbilt favored by 4, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't put together a parlay yet, but if I'm looking at my picks that I'm looking at this week, Tennessee minus 6.5, Vanderbilt minus 4, Charlotte and Georgia State. That could be fun. Georgia State's favored by 7.5 there. I picked Charlotte to cover that 7.5. And I picked Georgia Tech to cover 18 against.
They're at Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, yeah.
I think Ole Miss is pretty good. I
think they're pretty good too.
But I'm very interested in Ole Miss Bama next week. We can get into that in the show next week. But yeah, it's a weird week in college football. I mean, how many times did Power 5 teams play in G5 stadiums? You've got 6 of them this week?
Yeah, I believe Steven Anderson and the staff picks this week said this is a good week if you're trying to get social credit with your significant other to take them out for a date. Just be like, oh yeah, I'm skipping college football this week to take you out for dinner. Get a couple of points because I don't know that you'll be missing that much. So,
or maybe they're post game drinks after South Carolina does something in Athens. Who's to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, and what you do is you go to a sports bar, get some wings or something, then you can kind of
keep an eye on it.
Yeah, if any of them do get interesting, end the date a little early. But All right, we will be back here on Sunday morning to talk South Carolina and Georgia. I hope that we're eating a lot of crow for our predictions. We'll see. In the meantime, check out GamecockScoop.com. We got plenty more pregame coverage. We'll have our live chat during the game. If you guys haven't been checking those out on the Insiders Forum, a lot of fun, a little bit more interactive than the old live threads that we used to do. And you can hop in and kind of like real-time chat with both of us, ask questions, kind of break down some of the analysis of what we're seeing in real time. So check that out on the Insiders Forum on GamecockScoop.com. Until Sunday, we'll see you. Bye.